Thanks for joining us, and I'm so glad you have. Over the course of these next few videos, we're going to try and teach you some really simple things to look out for that are going to give you a lot more information and insight onto what your trees are doing and the steps that you can take, maybe with a little bit of assistance, to keep them in the best health possible. So here behind me we've got this beautiful big old oak tree. She's probably about 250 years old. Now we can tell that from the diameter of her, and what we're looking at today in this video is this union here. Now a union is where a branch leaves a stem, or two stems divide, and we're talking about specifically the point where those two branches join. So we have unions on the stem, trunk, and then we have unions higher up in the canopy. This first video, we're going to be looking at the stems of trees and things you can look out for that are telltale signs that something's not quite right, or that there's a bit of a weakness in the tree. So behind me here we have a codominant stem, and that means there's two main stems coming out of the initial bottom stem. It splits, so the co and then dominant, meaning that they're both dominant, rather than one central leader that has got lots of branches coming off it. I'm going to go and show you this on a smaller tree, and it's going to be way easier to visualise than seeing it on something like this. So we'll jump over now and take a look. So this is a really good example of included bark, and we can see this line here and this line here is kind of like the fault line between two tectonic plates, and it's constantly moving ever so slightly when the wind blows. It's never quite joined fully, and it's really important to recognise this and to take preventative action, especially if the tree is in the vicinity of a public road, your house, your garden, or it's just somewhere where you like to sit under and enjoy. But yeah, there's lots of things we can do, but we have to be able to identify these signs first. And that's what we're hopefully going to show you throughout these videos. So keep tuned, and we'll jump over to a smaller example where it'll be even easier to see what I'm talking about here. Behind me is a really cool example of what happens when one of these weak unions splits out. Trees are this great gateway to the past, where we can see events that happened 10, 15, 20, 50, some of these big old oak trees, 300 years ago. We can see the remnants of a storm, or where someone cut a branch. They're just these portholes of history. Portals. They're these portals of history, and just absolutely fascinating once you start to learn to read the signs. So above me here you can see a split, a big wound that's come, a codominant stem tore out. Looking at this, I'd probably say about 10 to 15 years ago. It's hollowed out in the centre of the tree to the point where I can actually reach my whole arm in. There's about this much wood all the way around the tree, and in this setting in the woods, it's not causing anyone any issues. In fact, there's a nest just above me here, and it just shows that when we have this really tidy mindset of everything has to be just so and perfect, we're actually taking away a lot of really valuable habitat for a lot of wildlife that's actually really struggling. So this is a really good example of a tree that's had a codominant stem tear out and has actually managed to survive. It's probably survived because it's so sheltered in the woods here, and it's hopefully going to continue on. It is in stress. It has got the first signs of decline. There's a lot of epicormic growth, which is this very straight suckering growth, and a lot of this growth is actually diseased and dying. So it's not a brilliant sign for the tree. However, for an ash tree, they're expected to live in an ideal condition up to about 280 years. This one's probably about 100, 110, and is going to slowly decline over the next 50 years. It's going to provide great habitat, it's not causing anyone any issues, and it's really cool to see how this tree is responding to this huge shock of losing half of its kind of aerial structure. It's soldiering on and doing everything it can to heal over this wood. We're going to come to this later on, but I just wanted to explain really quickly that when we say a tree is healing over often, what we mean is it's compartmentalizing. Trees can't heal. What they can do though is enclose areas of decay. They have several pathways which they can do this, and they can utilize their internal structure and their chemical strengths and constituents to halt the attack of pathogenic bacteria and fungi. A tree to us, because we're living on such different timescales, is quite a static being that slowly gets bigger. But the more you come to learn and appreciate trees, the more you realise that they're these really dynamic beings, they're these alive creatures that are in this constant movement and dance and fight to stay alive and grow. They depend on a community, they depend on a bit of luck and their inert kind of evolution pattern. There are things we can do to improve this, and there are lots of steps that we can take, not just pruning, but through careful feeding, making sure the growing conditions are right. We'll come to these in another video. So keep tuned, because there is lots that you can do to improve the health, the structure and the longevity of your trees. And we'll leave this girl, and hopefully she'll stay standing here for another 60, 70 years, which would be great. Here we have a really nice example of a codominant stem. So here we have the initial trunk coming up, then splits into two. That's the co, and they're both dominant, so the codominant part. And this is the part that we're really interested in. It's this union here, and you can see here that there is a weakness, a fracture, a line that's visible where the bark is separate and they're rubbing against each other. In a high wind, if you put two electrodes on here to measure the distance, ever so slightly, millimeters, fractions of a millimeter, this would be opening and closing. Now, once it's at this size, there isn't a great deal we can do. I wouldn't recommend taking this off here, and that's because you're going to be left with a really big wound. But when you buy a tree, or when you have young trees growing on your property, you have the ability in the first 10 to 15 years of their life to remedy this issue. So we've seen it on a 300-year-old oak tree, we've seen it on a 120-year-old ash tree, and some of the consequences that come from this. Here we have it on a 25-year-old horse chestnut tree, and it's just something that we're going to have to be mindful of going into the future. And I would suggest, not putting anything valuable in striking distance of this, and maybe not letting it grow too big, keeping it slightly reduced. On a younger tree, you can prune one of these out, and we'll show you that afterwards. And it's these steps that we can take, these preventative, sympathetic steps that we can take earlier on in a tree's life, that are then going to prevent heartache when it breaks or gets damaged, and cost in the future. A little bit of time now is a really good investment for the future. And trees grow on a time scale that's just, it's quite mind-boggling really, to imagine trees now that we're walking past that were around at the time of Henry VIII, and they're just these incredible creatures that are so long-lived. And there are things that we can do that are going to harm them in the future, but there's also a lot we can do that's going to be really beneficial. And that's the stuff I really want to focus on, so that you have a great toolkit and insight into the steps that you can take to create and manage healthier trees. So we'll jump over to a young tree and I'll show you how to prune out one of these codominant stems. So here we have a rather sad looking little cherry tree that we've got. And we've got a codominant stem starting here. We need to learn to tell the difference between a codominant stem and just a lateral branch. So here we have branches coming off the central stem. The same on this side. We've got some branches here, that are coming off a central stem, or a main stem, shall we say. We don't want to just take branches off. The less pruning, the better, really. What we want to avoid is this. So here we have what could be two branches that are both competing to be the top branch. Now, as soon as this branch has decided it's going to go for it, it's going to get more energy sent to it, and it's going to be able to produce more cells at the ends of its branches that are going to elongate it. And we're going to end up with this kind of competition, with them, both of them racing up. There's nothing wrong with a little bit of competition, but what we want to avoid is in 5, 10, 15, get the gist, further on down the line, this point here being a weakness. We want to avoid big cuts when we're doing tree surgery, and we'll show you some of the consequences of a large cut that was done 10, 15, 20 years ago, and how that's impacting and creating a weakness and disease in the tree now. So we want to make sure that whenever we're doing any sort of pruning, it's the smallest possible cuts. That's really, really important. It's better to have 40 little cuts than one big cut, because the tree can enclose and compartmentalise that small area much quicker than it can a large cut. That's why it's a great time to do it now. We can prune this off and it's not going to have any ill effects to the tree. If we leave it another 10 years, it's going to then cause some damage. Pruning cherry trees should really be done in the summer. However, this is the only example that we have on the farm that has a codominant stem. So we're going to nip it out now. We're going to make sure we take great care of this and feed it with some organic seaweed spray during the summer to make sure that it really bounces back and it has all the defences necessary to fight off any pathogens. So we're going to choose a stem. This central one is the one I'm going to keep. There's several reasons there. It has a nicer branching structure further up, and it's going to have a better aesthetic for the tree. You don't have to overcomplicate this. Pick the one that feels right to you. Use your intuition and choose the stem that you think is right, and then we're going to remove the other stem. So you want to get a really good sharp pair of segatiers. They're worth investing in, and we're going to take off this stem. Now for the pruning bit. We're going to do a whole other series on pruning, but what you want to do, a really simple way, is this here, where it joins, is called the branch collar. And you want to imagine that there's a mirror. I'll put a PDF or something up so that you can see this. And we're basically going to mirror that for the angle of our pruning cut. So we don't want to leave a stub, and we don't want to flush cut it. We want to prune just back to the branch collar. There's a reason for doing this, and that's because in this area the tree knows there's a weakness, and it knows that there's a potential for this branch to break, and it knows that it's going to need to enclose that area and protect itself as quickly as possible. So it has certain chemicals and cells that are specific to this region that are going to help enclose and protect the tree from this wound. That's why we want to do it as close to the area as possible to help the tree as much as we can. Hope you found this useful, and we'll be doing some more videos on pruning, so don't worry if you want to learn more, we're going to get to them. Hi, pretty bad weather here today, but this is a really, really cool example of what we can expect with old pruning wounds and what we want to really avoid. The reason that you have trees, that we have trees to climb and work on and care for, is the fact that A, someone didn't cut them down in the past, they haven't blown over in a storm because they're weak, and they haven't died of disease because they're weakened, and basically it's because they were lucky and were cared for. And we want to do everything possible to promote tree health and expand their longevity and lifetime. So behind me here is a really, really good example. We're in a field, a farmer, obviously at some point, I'm going to say about 15 to 20 years ago, took some branches off. There's a lot of things we do in life that have negative consequences. The majority of the time, we don't do things because we think it's going to harm something. It's an accident. And I really hope these videos are going to help you prevent these accidents, prevent you doing something or paying somebody to do something which is actually going to damage your trees. So the farmer here obviously wanted to come in with his machinery, drive around these trees so that his life would be easier. What he's done is taken off a branch here. Now you can see this pruning wound and all this decay and rot and stuff coming down underneath it, and that's a direct consequence of pruning this branch 20 years ago. On the floor here we have the remnants of these fungal brackets. These brackets and this fungi will have been allowed entry into this tree because it was weakened. Now, if you can imagine a tree standing there and a huge limb rips off, it's going to be really, really traumatic for the tree. Whether trees feel pain is a hotly debated topic, but what is scientifically proven is that they respond to stress. They respond to changes in their environment, changes in their structure, and they have to actively respond to the onslaught of pathogens and fungi. So this tree here is trying to respond, and it's trying to enclose the wound and cover it up so that no more fungi can get in. Unfortunately, this tree is on a losing battle, and I imagine in the next 15 years we're going to lose it. Whether we lose it because it breaks here or because a really aggressive fungi manages to get in and obliterate it. But what we can safely say is that this wound, that this action that somebody took 20 years ago was the cause for the death of this tree over the next 10 to 20 years. And it's really important to understand that the things that we do today have this impact further on in the future. And just like it would be a really traumatic experience for the tree to lose this huge limb that got ripped off, it's equally traumatic for us to come in and cut off a massive branch. Occasionally, there is no alternative. We just have to do it for safety reasons. But we do it in the knowledge that it's very damaging. We don't just come in and cut a branch off because it's the easy thing to do. And that's something I really want to share with you today. That as a tree surgeon, it's harder to go out and prune the branches of something. It's harder to climb out, to get to the very ends and take a small amount of weight off than it is to take a huge branch off right at the base. So if you've got a contractor coming around suggesting that you just take a limb off directly at the trunk, you really need to ask why. Why are you doing that? Is it for a safety concern, or is it because they don't feel comfortable climbing out to the very ends of the branches and pruning where it would be much more beneficial to the tree? So I really hope this video helps. This is the first section, and it's been all about stems, weaknesses, old wounds, and moving on to the next video we're going to talk about unions up in the canopy, branch structure, things to look out for, and things that you can actively do to improve the structural integrity of the tree. I really hope this is useful. Stay with us, and the next video will be going live next week. So hold on, and I hope this is of educational benefit and brings you a bit of joy. Thank you very much.